Caroline Crampton tells the story of hypochondria, beginning with the age of Hippocrates and taking us right through to the wellness industry today. Great to have you on the show, Caroline.
Thanks very much for having me.
So, does this come from personal experience? Where did all this start?
Yes, very much so. So I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a kind of cancer, when I was 17. And I went through the usual treatment for that, which is chemotherapy, radiotherapy, stem cell transplant. And then I was told that I was cured when I was 22. Apart from, I couldn't quite ever let go of that anxiety that it was going to come back. And over time, that morphed away from just the symptoms associated with the cancer into all kinds of other things. So that's kind of the origin story of the book. And also the strand that runs through it is my own personal experiences of hypochondria.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because, you know, people use the word flippantly, oh, you're a hypochondriac because, you know, you're always saying you're ill. But it is actually a type of anxiety disorder. It's not nice at all.
It is indeed, yes. So hypochondria is quite an archaic, old-fashioned word at this point. Most doctors practicing now, if you speak to them, will refer to it as health anxiety. And there are also two classified psychiatric disorders, illness anxiety disorder and somatic symptom disorder, which are sort of two flavors of the same thing, really. So yes, it is very serious, but it is, as you say, also something that I think pop culture, society in general encourages us to laugh at.
And it's understandable when somebody in a situation like yourself who's had cancer at a young age or any age, it's understandable that you're going to be constantly worried.
It is. And I think a lot of the dictionary definitions of hypochondria use words like justified. So they'll say hypochondria is an unjustified anxiety about your health. And for a long time, I didn't even really think of what I was experiencing as anxiety because I thought, well, I'm supposed to be anxious about this. I'm supposed to be worried. That's a natural consequence of having a serious illness. And it took me quite a lot of time and thought and research to really understand that actually that kind of anxious response, that anxious mechanism, I don't think it matters whether you've had the illness or not. I think we can always find a reason to justify something. Might not be an illness, but it might be maybe you have a history of it in your family, or you live in an area, say in the case of something like asthma, you live in an area with high air pollution. There's always a reason. You can always find a reason. So I stopped thinking about it in those terms of, you know, real/not real or justified, unjustified, because I think it's all a bit subjective, really.
Yeah, I think doctors should as well, to be honest.
Well, I've had a really very surprising and very positive response from doctors to the book so far. I was not worried, but I was just expecting some pushback from that quarter, really. But actually, every single one who's read it and contacted me has, you know, said how useful they find it actually to understand it told from the other side of the diagnostic table, as it were. So, yeah, I've been really surprised by that, but very pleased.
Yeah, progress. Well, let's look at the book then. It's called A Body Made of Glass, A History of Hypochondria. So, as the name suggests, it starts with Hippocrates.
It does. Well, it starts a bit before Hippocrates, actually. We look at the very earliest humans, you know, right in the very dawn of time evolution, and think about why would this anxiety, why do we even have it? Why has it evolved to be part of us? And we look at, I look at ancient Egypt, ancient Babylon, these early civilizations where medicine is just emerging from religion and mysticism. And then, yes, Hippocrates is a very important figure from ancient Greece. He was living and working around the 5th century BC because he kind of invents or codifies the way that we think about medicine today. He takes case histories, he treats patients, he has regimens that a lot of which we would recognize from wellness today to do with diet and exercise and so on. And he uses the word hypochondria in his writing, although not at that time to mean what we think of it as today. There it's actually an anatomical term for the part of your abdomen where your liver is called the hypochondria. And so any disease arising from that area is also called hypochondria. And then it goes on this journey over the following about 1,500 years, centuries really, to become, from this bodily condition, to become this mental condition as we know it today.
How bizarre. Did you manage to find out how and when it changed? Was it a gradual thing?
It was a very gradual thing. It was very caught up with what they call humoral theory, which is this understanding of the human body as having these four humours, black bile, yellow bile, blood and phlegm, which they believed had to be in balance in your body for you to be healthy. And there was a whole sort of codified understanding of disease to be, if you didn't have enough black bile, you'd experience this. If you had too much yellow bile, you'd experience that. And everything was all about trying to restore that balance. And hypochondria was very connected with black bile, and melancholy was the obvious consequence of too much black bile. So they were very tied in together. And gradually, as that theory passes out of understanding with the arrival of science and the Enlightenment, this association between bad mental health and hypochondria remains even after all that bodily stuff with humours has disappeared. So you really start to see it accepted as a mental condition in the very early 19th century, sort of 1810, 1820 is when you really see that switch flip.
Because I always think about this. It was Hippocrates, wasn't it, that says that all illnesses, all diseases begin in the gut. And we're finding that out more now with gut microbiome. I mean, it seems that any illness seems to come from the gut. So he was right.
Yes, I mean, there's lots in Hippocrates that resonates with what today's science is now coming up with. That's a really good example. Where I found it quite funny when I was researching it is that there are also things that absolutely we would never ever do today that are in Hippocrates. Some of his treatments for things like epilepsy, where he's advocating, bleeding people and smearing them with dung and things like that. I don't think we want to be doing that today. But there are some good core principles, I think, that do still apply.
So do you go into the book about people in history who have had, in inverted brackets, hypochondria?
Yeah, so I look at quite a few different well-known figures from literature and culture and politics and so on who we either know to have had it or who, looking at their lives and the records they've left behind, we can be fairly sure. So some examples that people might have heard of, Marcel Proust is one. Charles Darwin is another one that often surprises people because obviously he was a great scientist and a very productive person, but he also completely crippled with worries about his health, had a lot of very disparate and difficult to understand symptoms, including what we would probably call today psoriasis on his head, and a lot of stomach problems. And he followed this very rigorous regimen of what was at the time called a water cure, which involved drinking a lot of cold water and also bathing in cold water multiple times a day. So if his house, Down House, is now open to the public, you can visit. And in his office, he had a bath in his office so that he could jump up from the desk and just pop into the bath at a moment's notice whenever the cure required. And another one that I really enjoyed researching was Jane Austen's mother. Oh. Not Jane Austen herself, but her mother was a terrible hypochondriac for years and years. And actually, hypochondria is in pretty much every Jane Austen novel when I was rereading them with that lens, which I found very interesting. So yes, there's lots and lots of different people like that in the book. And I think it's once you're more aware of it, I think you start to see these people everywhere.
Yeah, because Proust, am I right in he was the one that ended up being a hermit? He just cork-lined his bedroom and stayed there?
Yes, he did. So he was so terrified. His particular problem right from childhood was asthma and respiratory problems. And I mean, in some ways he was right in that we do know that, foggy conditions, bad air pollution, all these things can trigger people's asthma. So in that sense, he was very much on the kind of justified end of his fears. But he started to worry that everything could potentially trigger an attack of him, even things like cooking smells. So he actually made himself quite ill near the end of his life because he was barely eating because he was too afraid to have anything cooked anywhere near him. So you see how that transition from a good idea, a sound piece of advice can end up getting twisted into something that does somebody harm.
Yeah. And these are all, as you say, these are all academics, they're not silly people.
No, absolutely not. And I hope that's something that people can take away from the book if either they experience this or they have someone close to them who does, that all kinds of very serious, very talented and very well respected people have endured this. And therefore, it's not something to, I think, to dismiss in others or in yourself if you detect it.
Indeed. What about Virginia Woolf? Was she one? Did she have hypochondria?
I don't know that she would have called it that. I think she obviously had a lot of different mental health problems throughout her life. She had a couple of serious breakdowns, one very early on in her life. But she did, I think, what you see, particularly in her diaries, she did have this habit that's very associated with hypochondria of what's called hypervigilance or heightened bodily awareness, constantly monitoring your body for something that could be wrong when, you know, our bodies are complex machines that are busy doing all kinds of things without our knowledge. But the hypochondriac is constantly on the alert for any kind of twinge that they can latch onto, that the anxiety can latch onto. And so in Woolf's diaries, you find things like, you know, she's very worried about her teeth on one day. And then a couple of days later, she's worried about being tired, even though she hasn't really done anything. So she seems to constantly monitor her health and look for problems in a way that feels very hypochondriac to me.
And it must be very tiring. I mean, any sort of anxiety, we've all been through certain anxious moments in our life, you know, and it's very real to you. It's very frightening. You can't stop your brain from worrying about something if you're worried about it.
No, exactly. And that's why a lot of that stock advice, I think, that people get doesn't really help. You know, being told that, oh, you're probably imagining it. Well, probably I am, but that doesn't really help me break out of the thought patterns. So yes, I think that's why it is important to have people understand that it's something to be taken seriously in the same way that, say, depression should obviously be taken seriously, that you can't just sort of wish it away, that you might need to excavate it a bit further, seek help and so on. Yeah,
I think it's a great idea for a book, and I don't think it's been covered as far as I know, so it's quite unique. Do you bring the reader right up to date to the medical world now?
Yes. So in the latter chapters, a very big part of them is the rise of the internet and how...
Oh, that's the worst thing.
Obviously, it's completely transformed our lives in many, many ways in the last 20 years, but I think especially in this one, because where once you had to, you know, go looking in books and medical dictionaries or talk to a doctor or a nurse or a friend with a medical background to get some information about what might be going on. Now you can Google it in seconds and you can keep Googling it.
And it's not good.
And there's no quality filter on the information that you might receive as well.
No.
So I sort of, in my cancer treatment, straddled when that was really becoming a thing, because I went through my first round of cancer treatment in 2006 when I didn't have a smartphone. You know, we had a dial-up broadband connection in my parents' house and that was it. And then later, when I was having more cancer treatment, I did have my own laptop. I did have my own phone. And the difference in how it made me feel was very stark when I looked back on it. So yes, we do come right up to date with even how TikTok was affecting young girls during the pandemic and so on.
Wow. How are you now, Caroline?
How am I now? I think I'm well, completely cancer-free, have been for over a decade. And also, I've actually found the process of writing the book very helpful. I think I don't, make any bold statements about a cure or anything, but it has been very helpful, I think, to really do all this self-analysis that was required in putting the book together and see patterns and things and actually be able to say, you know what, I'm still here.
Good for you. Good for you. Well, the result is both a fascinating cultural history of hypochondria and a moving account of what it means to live with this invisible, elusive and increasingly widespread condition. The book is called A Body Made of Glass. It's a history of hypochondria and it's by Caroline Crampton, who we're chatting to now. Caroline, I know it's not your first book. If people want to find out more about you, do you have a website?
I do, yes. It's just carolinecrampton.com, so you can find more about me, and my previous book to this one is on there as well.
Simple as that. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Good luck with the book.
Thank you very much for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.